From the Channel Seed Studios, Nick Osen and Jake Brend talk all things Big 12. This is Firmly Entrenched, powered by Heartland Flags and Gifts. Every team, every sport, every flag, almost. Here's Nick and Jake on Iowa Everywhere.
Welcome to the Channel Seed Studios. It's a 1-0 week. I'm Jake Brend with Local 5 Sports, joined by Nick Osen of 24/7 Sports. Nick, how was week one?
Really good. You know, I almost can't believe, my friend, that we are really already in, getting to be in the heart of football season. We'll have a huge game to talk about locally, some big-time games around the conference, but I'm doing really well. It's pretty crazy. We're heading into the full week 2 of Iowa State football.
It feels like football outside.
Oh, it does. Which honestly was a welcome thing for me today, because it's been very hot, very humid. I'm liking a little bit of the breeze, gets you ready for football, as they say. Specifically high school football makes me think about, but I'm ready for it.
It feels really good out. And today we're going to do a brief reaction to you and I. It's Wednesday, so there's been a lot of different podcasts to talk about the game already, so we won't focus too much time on that. What we're really going to go into is a preview of this week's CyHawk game. I was in Iowa City. Nick was in Ames, so we really can riff off what we saw. We're going to discuss a little bit of what happened to the Big 12, and we're going to close with some game picks. But first, we're going to address the big news, the sad news, happy news all at the same time. Nick, what's coming up?
Yeah, the bittersweet news, honestly, is, it gets thrown around a lot, my friends, but that's the truth of it. For anybody that's like really close with me, or, that kind of listened throughout this process. I got a little choked up on the radio last week, if I'm being quite honest. My time here is coming to a pretty quick end. Next week will actually be our last, kind of look here. And this next week will be kind of my last here in person, as producer Aiden's giving me the thumbs down. I'm heading back home with 247 Sports. Grew up in the Madison, Wisconsin area, so I'll be sticking with a company that I really loved, really enjoyed, and covering my alma mater, the Wisconsin Badgers. So I'm excited to get there and to see what that's like. But as kind of some of my comments, my messages, my posts said, this place is special. For our listeners and viewers here, quite honestly, just before the show, we were talking about the next time I'll be able to get back in this state and see people here. It's been incredible. We're not going to get too sad or anything. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And like I said, I will be back around. Certainly, Badgers obviously come to this state to at least play the Hawkeyes. But, this community, this fan base, the coaching staffs, everybody here, it's just been really incredible, and I see why, so many people call it a special place. I could not agree more, and I'm going to miss it, and my girlfriend and my family, we will miss it for sure.
It's definitely a bittersweet news, because Aiden and everyone on your boards, everyone doesn't want you to leave, but you're going home, which is awesome, and you're covering a pretty big team in the Big Ten, and you're going to be great, and we're I'm going to see you at Carver Hawkeye when the Badgers come and visit the Hawkeyes this winter.
This season already, which is going to be sweet.
And the podcast will continue through football. We'll just be remote we'll be over StreamYard, which will still be good. Nick will still get his Cyclones fixing.
Exactly.
And speaking of the Cyclones, they had a big win on Saturday. I never want to overreact to a week 1 win and call it a big win over an FCS team. But when I picked them to win 16-9 and have it be a miserable game, and they handled business and have it over at halftime.
Little credit to
you were right.
To both of us. No, I wasn't even looking for me. I meant to both of us. We'll get to mine, but we both picked 9 points for you and I.
That's true.
And that's exactly what happened.
I didn't think about that.
Legitimately, we did. You said 16-9. I said 30-9. So we'll get into a little more.
You said 30-9?
I did.
You were dead on.
It was a good pick.
Oh my!
Or no. I'm sorry. 30-9 is what the exact score was. I said 27-9.
Okay.
Yes, without the beautiful, deep shot Contreras field goal, it would have been a perfect 27-9. So yes, oh man, I would have cashed in my lottery ticket, but still close. And just the 9 points, the fact that that happened and doesn't usually, was pretty good for both of us.
So I would say that the part we need to talk about the least, or maybe what was the least surprising, was how good the defense was. While we're on that topic of the 9 points, I think this has the potential to be maybe the best defense under Matt Campbell. And I was at Local 5 on Sunday, or maybe it was Monday, one of those 2 days. Jeremiah Cooper won Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week. And in the press release, it said that Cooper was the first Cyclone with 2 interceptions in a game since 2018. So I'm like, who did that in 18? And I went back and found out that it was Marcel Spears against Texas Tech. It was a game that was a lot closer than I remembered, and I got myself down a rabbit hole and watched the highlights of that game. And there were 2 or 3 highlights of Iowa State D-backs just getting mossed. And it wasn't really their fault. They just were not Big 12 starting level defensive backs. And looking back to that and comparing that to now, wow. Iowa State has some dudes in that secondary.
Yeah, they really do. And, as we kind of get into the mini 2-minute drill in some of our breakdown right now, just want to remind everyone, part of our show sponsored by Heartland Flags and Gifts. Anytime you're really looking for some great flags, specifically sports, schools, whatever you like, this is the place to go. Online, heartlandflags.com, or in store at 3719 Southwest 9th Des Moines. Free shipping anywhere in the U.S. New products constantly, every team, every sport, every flag, almost. And that does include Simpson College.
Roll Storm.
Just wanted to say that, my friend. It's so good to be here and live again with you. Here's what I'm going to say as we work, a little bit backwards in terms of some of our planning. The best under Campbell. Now, anybody here knows me. We're all friends here, and many people listening are kind of used to, my coverage and my demeanor. I approach life, really everything, optimistically, right? I'm going to push back a little bit simply because last year's defense, I think people do forget a little bit just because the wins and losses weren't always there, Jake. But that was by almost any metric a top 7 or 8 in the entire country. So that's why I could see this being the best secondary. I do push back a little bit on best defense. I think eventually they're going to miss guys like Will McDonald, MJ Anderson, even a guy like, Orion Vance or Colby Reeder, because linebackers are young. But you're right. Defense, not surprising at all. We both hit it on the head with 9 points. And I know that you were pretty impressed. I was as well, but I think you especially with some of what you saw from the quarterback for Iowa State as well.
Yeah, Rocco, he didn't have a Heisman performance or really anything close to that. In fact, he didn't have enough snaps to qualify for a lot of statistical performances of the week. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't. No, I'm not shocked because of the snap count, but I did not realize that.
Statso War, or the Toad calculator, whatever his name is on Twitter, from TCU, he puts together his stats each week of top performers, and Rocco wasn't even in there because he didn't play enough snaps, which I think just says to how Campbell played that game exactly how he wanted to. So what I think I saw from Rocco was
efficiency for sure.
Yeah, he was efficient. He was accurate. He missed a couple deep balls, just got a little too much under them. But that's definitely what I saw. First start jitters. I think it's better to be overthrowing your deep balls than underthrowing them. So maybe he'll rein that in. But they didn't really put him in positions to make mistakes, and he didn't make mistakes. And then he scrambled a little bit too, which I know everybody wanted to see that from Deckers last year, and he didn't really do that. So I liked what I saw from Rocco. I don't think what he did is going to be able to carry an offense, but the point of it is I don't think Iowa State needs Rocco Beck to carry the offense.
Yeah, I think I agree with just about all of that, Jake. I had pretty good expectations going in for both quarterbacks. I think the world of J.J. Cole long-term. I went in depth. I think it was on our first show about him and Abu Sama, some of this class, which we will have to touch on. But, I felt like in his moments, he showed some mobility. I don't think he got as much time in the pocket at times as Rocco did. So I don't think it was necessarily the most fair way to look at it. But overall, I think Rocco looked good. pretty good to really good. I think he looked confident, poised. I mean, that was just really important to me because it's first live action. As we've talked about, that game's not always maybe as easy as it should be, you'd think, for Iowa State. And, getting to have the blessing and opportunity to be like at the post-game presser and then at media yesterday, it was cool to see him. He's starting to really exude some of that confidence. He was all smiles, but also recognizing, it's another major opportunity coming up. I think he knows, and maybe just brushed it off a little bit because he knows how close he was to having a potential 4 or 5 touchdown performance when you look at the rushing touchdown as well as a whole. Just a bit off on a couple of those deep balls. And again, I don't think you can talk about this game without giving some credit to Jordan Langs with special teams, Matt Campbell, the actual players, and like Tyler Perkins, Chase Contreras, that unit, Jalen Knoll. That unit just looked fantastic. But for anybody that's really been listening and tuned in, that shouldn't be a surprise because there wasn't this overwhelming change in scheme or schematics or even full-on personnel. Obviously, a new kicker there in Chase Contreras, but I just felt like a few things needed to get cleaned up. I think so far that's been done very, very well by the Cyclones. And as we get into things a little bit further from now, that unit's going to have to be really good again on Saturday, Jake.
See, I'll push back. I thought it was a surprise, but that's just because I've watched so much bad special teams. But what wasn't a surprise is you bring in a special teams coach and look what happened. That's what I think Iowa State fans and media had been begging for the last few years. So it's good to see. I don't know if swallowing his pride is the correct term, but it's good to see that Campbell made maybe a change in philosophy and said, okay, let's get a special teams coordinator in here. And after a 1-game sample size, that's the key, a 1-game sample size, it's a world of difference. They went from one of the worst special teams units in the country to really dang good. And I don't expect that game in, game out, but I expect a good, above average unit, which if they if they had that last year, they're in a bowl game.
I think it's fair to say you don't expect to notice the special teams as much either way throughout the season. Like this last week, whoa, it was incredible. It was like a lot of good stuff. At times last year, maybe a couple things that weren't so good. So I think as long as it's consistent, I'm trying to think of a kind of comparison like it. I think of we're all baseball fans here, a catcher in baseball. Like you don't think of them as much unless they're like letting the pitch go by, obviously
right.
Letting another runner. So I think it's things like that, incredibly important. They don't always get talked about as positively as maybe they should. I think that was a major positive in week 1. And again, the only thing that maybe was a touch of a surprise was the 56-yard field goal. That was a cool moment to see. Obviously, for a kid I got to know a little bit, not really a kid, he's wrapping up his career, but Chase Contreras, when he decided to come to Iowa State, the excitement around him, we spoke with him after the game and the team, the sidelines were getting a little excited. That was kind of cool to see. I think really job well done so far from Campbell, Langs, and co.
So the tight ends, we can touch on them as we move into a preview of the CyHawk game. The tight ends were the 3 leading receivers on Saturday for Iowa State. That shows that they're a security blanket for Becht, and that's because, one, they're big targets. Structurally, they're bigger targets than wide receivers. They're typically in easier spots to hit. They're going and running a 7-yard curl route. They're doing out routes. It seemed Becht was comfortable hitting them, and they're good. Ben Bramer outran a defensive back. He's a really good tight end. But I think as we get into the CyHawk game, that's going to be a major key for the offense and the defense, because I think the same way Iowa has an elite tight end core between Luke Lachey and Eric Gall, they're going to be going for their tight ends too. So I think for both offenses, maybe if Iowa can't hit their tight ends or if Iowa State can't hit their tight ends, that could really stall their offenses in a game that I expect to be ugly and low scoring.
I think that's really well said, Jake. we were both pretty high on the tight ends. We've been high on them, I think, since our first show. So that was really cool to see. I think that the depth of that room is about as good as it has been for Iowa State. As we get into the CyHawk preview, you make a really good point. Iowa, you saw Lachey especially, but physical, good size, can make plays with the ball. It's going to be similar to what I said, on a show earlier today about this secondary matchup. I think the tight ends are also going to be really good, important, and, it was good to see not only the offense feature them for the Cyclones, but Rocco to find them, go to them. There was kind of a funny moment at media, just, basically talking about if it was like designed to be so important in the game plan. He said, no, not necessarily, but they were open. I got it to them. They were some of his first reads. I thought that was really good. You guys know on the show, I think the world of Ben Bramer. That is a surefire NFL player to me. I think there could be another one or two in that room. I tend to think of Gabe Burkle. I think Andrew Keller, once he really gets further into the mix receiving-wise, is going to do some things. I think it's just a room that is coached, recruited, developed very, very well for Iowa State. But one thing that's been interesting, Jake, as we get further into this and inch a little bit closer to projections, and you know longer than me, as you've been following this game much longer, these matchups, and specifically the last 5 or 6 of these, have generally been very, very close and a little bit of wacky or different type games.
I'll stop you at 5 because 6 matchups ago was when Iowa won 42-3.
Okay. Keep it to 5.
That was a rough game. But the last 5 matchups have been decided by 5.6 points on average. So there's a 1-point win, a 2-point win, and then I think a couple different 10-point wins by Iowa in there. So these games all come down to the margins. They come down to turnovers and special teams pretty much no matter what. If you're an Iowa State fan going into this game expecting the offense to be super efficient, pick up first downs, score 4 touchdowns, you are setting yourself up for failure. If you're an Iowa fan expecting for the same thing, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. What Iowa State fans should be looking for and hoping for is, let's just hope there's no fumble in the red zone by your best player. Breece Hall, in my opinion, one of the greatest football players in Iowa State history.
No opinion even. Easily.
Yeah. He's one of the greatest players ever. He got stripped by Jack Campbell inside his own 5-yard line in 2021. That completely changed the momentum of the game. You can't have your best players making mistakes like that, and you can't run into your punt returner at the end of the game and fumble to lose. That's what this game will come down to, because I think on paper, so many of the strengths are equal for Iowa and Iowa State, especially on defense. For Iowa this year, you always expect their front 7 to be good. I think their secondary is the main strength of that defense, with DeJean, Xavier Nwampa, Sebastian Castro. I'm blanking on the other safety's name.
I believe Lee is starting this week. Schulte as well.
Yeah, Quinn Schulte's who I was thinking of. Yeah, so you're not going to be able to really throw deep on Iowa, and that's not how Iowa State won last year. They won on that 99-yard drive by getting 5 yards a pop, 5 yards a pop.
That was
5
a
yards
special
a pop.
drive.
That's how you have to beat Iowa, and vice versa. That's how you have to beat Iowa State. It's patient offense, and it's not taking those risks on deep balls. So that's what it's going to come down to, because frankly, I know the Iowa State offensive line looked improved. It's a whole nother beast when you're going up against Iowa's defensive line, and Iowa's offensive line, I thought, didn't look very good. And they're going to be challenged even more so against Iowa State.
Yeah, so that was a game I didn't see as much as I would have liked with the Iowa game. I saw some of it, but just based on, reading material from some of my colleagues and people I really trust, echoing what you said, Jake, I don't think either offensive line looked maybe as good as we potentially thought. Iowa State's did look better. I didn't think there was a ton of pressure. Again, I'll go back to J.J. Cole. I think at times pressure was able to like escape the offensive line a little bit at times when he was in, it seemed. I think that the run game average was maybe a little bit exaggerated off of a couple runs, but there were some holes there, and I think there's the potential to be better. But like you mentioned, that Iowa front is much different than UNI's. But then again, Iowa State's front, and specifically that front three, looked really, really good. Tyler Onyedem looked like one of the best players on the field in a game that really did feature some stars, specifically defensively for ISU. I think Dom Orange is going to be kind of that game wrecker just in terms of filling that role for the Cyclones this year. And I think some of the linebackers, while young, will provide some of the physicality and speed to make things even tougher for Iowa's run game because, again, I didn't see as much as I would have liked. I will make that qualifier. But based on what I did see, looking at the numbers and what others have said, I wasn't super impressed by that. I know that there's some excitement about that Iowa backfield, I think, as there should be. But I completely agree with you, Jake. And as we get a little bit closer to our picks, I think you make a great point that, like, personnel-wise, things are almost even and the strengths are so similar. Secondary, tight ends, I would probably lean Iowa State wideouts. I think maybe Iowa's running backs at times have shown some things, but I'm high on that room. We know that. Yeah. You know, linebackers tend to differ, some young guys on the Cyclones, but I think it's a really good comparison. I think there's a reason that the spread is fairly low for this game. And I think the only thing, as I've kind of consistently said this week, that would surprise me is if either team wins by 2 scores or more.
Yeah, that would be surprising. If I were to say one team will win by 2 scores, it would probably be Iowa if I had to guess, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it would be more likely to see Iowa come in and win 20-7 opposed to Iowa State win 20-7. But
is that personnel based, or is that maybe, you know, having followed this game and the Cyclones for so long, maybe having seen some of those games? Whether people will admit it or not, I do know that there are nerves about this game, like from the fans on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see that maybe admitted as much by some fans, but I do think that's a legitimate thing from being around it for a couple years. Obviously, the message boards, all that, and I understand it. Whether people want to downplay it or not, I think it's a fun game. It's a rivalry game. It's in state, and not every state gets opportunities like this. Which is, not to go on a tangent, but why I would be sad long term, I think, if this game went away.
Yeah, that's a conversation that I do not want the game to go away. I think anybody in the state that wants it to go away is crazy. But going back to why I think it would be more likely for Iowa to win, I think
by double digits, like comparatively.
Yeah. I'm going to say that's like a 5% chance, by the way. I don't think it's that likely, but I've just seen it in the game too many times where freak bounce of the ball ends up Cooper DeJean pick 6. I can just see that already. And DeJean almost had one of those against Utah State on Saturday. Had a ball bounce right into his hands. He dropped it. And you can't blame the guy. He had 3 pick 6s last year. So
he's a really, really special player.
So I think when I think that, it's more just past history in this game between Campbell and Ferentz. It's that there's been a lot more freak accidents that have gone against Iowa State. And I don't want to, accidents isn't fair to Phil Parker. The way Iowa plays defense, they create those accidents. Mm-hmm. They may look like accidents, but Phil Parker, the way that they approach defense, they're practicing ball bouncing off guy's helmet, you diving on it to pick it off. Like that. They're doing that in practice. And there's a reason they're the best in the country at it. It's not luck when you create it every single year. But one way where this game could change is with the quarterback position for Iowa specifically, and it's Cade McNamara. We talk about pretty close personnel-wise between the two teams. Mm-hmm. The only reason I agree with that right now is because McNamara is not 100%. if McNamara is 100%, I think they've got a pretty significant advantage at quarterback. But on Saturday, he didn't look 100. I would say he looked 65, 70%. And the Iowa offensive line, honestly, for pass protection wise, looked good. They looked better than last year. It was really their run blocking that looked bad. But I think if Iowa State could get to McNamara early, because what he was saying yesterday in his availability was that obviously going into the game, you feel the best you do all week. Coming out, you don't. And he said he didn't get hit that much, but he still obviously was worn down a little bit by the end. I could tell just from the sidelines that some of his throws to the sidelines didn't have as much zip on the first quarter did. So I think could you imagine if the first play of the game, Dominique Orange did what he did to Theo Day to McNamara?
Jeez, that was a huge
just
hit.
Blow him up. And it wasn't anything illegal. It wasn't anything dirty. If McNamara takes 4 or 5 of those hits early on, that could really change not only how he's throwing, but how Brian Ferentz calls the game. So I think that's really where the swing can be in this game is, 1, how healthy is McNamara, and 2, how does McNamara handle not being healthy? Because he said yesterday his deep ball wasn't affected at all. It's more just the mobility. I mean, Ferentz said yesterday that QB sneaks are off the table.
Yeah.
And bootlegs are too. And I don't know how much I buy that. That's coach speak, but still, he was not out scrambling around on Saturday. It was pretty much somebody come at you, get the ball away.
I think there was some coach speak in there because that just felt a little bit too maybe obvious or outward from Coach Ferentz. But I do think you're right. I mean, I'm hoping for, the person's health's sake that they're not trotting him out there at 65%. That could be a little bit, scary health-wise for the players, but I understand, some of it can be pain tolerance, and obviously this is an exciting game that you want to be a part of. I think either way, personnel-wise, I still think it would have been pretty close, but your point makes a lot of sense. Obviously, Cade has done some pretty notable things in his college career, and there was a lot of talk and excitement about this edition. I'm really curious how it translates not only to another game, Jake, but against a really good defense, and a pretty deep one in Iowa State. I think they will make things difficult. And right before we get to our picks, because I want to share them, I don't think we can talk about this game without noting, I'm sure you saw or maybe were there since you were at Iowa Media,
Seth Anderson talking about, making an interesting comment, I guess I would say. And I didn't see the whole quote, so maybe people have taken it out of context, but about the Iowa State secondary and what he saw, because I can totally understand players being confident. And it's not like somebody's going to say something like, we can't do anything, against them, that type of thing. Obviously, I played sports, you wouldn't say that. But I just think that was an interesting spot for a player new to this game against the unit that is pretty likely Iowa State's best on the entire team. Yeah, it was my friend Mitch Fick of CBS 2 out of Cedar Rapids asked, I believe, what he saw out of the Iowa State defense. Seth Anderson said a lot of opportunity, and then Mitch asked, good or bad? He said good and laughed. So you're a receiver, you have to be confident. Same thing with defensive backs. Is that something he should have said publicly to the media? I guess time will tell.
Let me just add, I don't think that's like good or bad. Again, I played sports. I think that type of stuff is fun. Like, yes. Obviously, yeah, that's really all I was saying, because it's like, oh my goodness, are Miles Purchase and TJ Tampa now going to try that much harder because of this? Of course not. They're giving their all either way. I just thought it was maybe a bit intriguing. Interesting is probably the best way I would say. Just thought it was kind of funny. There's so much seriousness with it, and I'll just be interested to see. Believe he made a pretty good play in week 1. What kind of happens, this week in terms of him going against a really, really good secondary in week 2. But before we get to a little bit more conference stuff, Jake, how do you see this game playing out?
So I've been thinking a lot about it the last few days. And for Iowa State's sake, I feel better about it today, Wednesday, September 6th, than I did Saturday morning. But I still can't get away from Rocco's second career start being against this Iowa defense that is really, really, really good. And you have NFL talent scattered around the secondary. I just think there's going to be one mistake in there, which might be one too many. And I'm going to take the Hawkeyes 15-13. I know that's a really odd score. I'm going to go with a safety in there, maybe a missed extra point. The Hawkeyes will get to 15 some way. Iowa State will score maybe a touchdown and have a couple field goals. But I'll finish my prediction with talking about Rocco and where maybe this can go well. In 2021, Purdy is, of course, the best quarterback on the field, maybe the best player on the field. And Iowa State gave him that freedom to kind of just sling it. And that led him to throwing 3 interceptions, getting benched. Maybe without that confidence in Rocco, Iowa State isn't really testing the Iowa secondary. They're playing it safe, and they do what they did on that 99-yard drive last year, and they just maybe death by a million paper cuts Iowa. I think that's the path to Iowa State winning, is relying on that defense, playing the field position game, which Ferentz has beat Campbell in every time they've played, and just getting something out of the run game and the tight end game and getting just enough out of the quarterback spot. But I think it's a little more likely that there's a couple more mistakes that go Iowa's way and the Hawkeyes win.
Yeah, my friend, it's hard to argue against some of the logic within it, specifically, close game, a lot of good defenders on Iowa, absolutely. And, if this game were played at the Hawkeyes, maybe I would think this is a little different. So I've got this game within really 1 to 4 points as well. I think I agree with the way that you beat Iowa. I'm not really sure who kind of takes over the Jyrell Brock role that we saw last year, because he was pretty special in that game. Obviously, Xavier Hutchinson was. So, you're going to need somebody to step up. I almost like it for Rocco that he is still so new to this. Like you said, I don't think he's maybe going to have as much freedom or maybe as much on his shoulders necessarily. I think this Iowa State defense is better than a lot of those that you have seen. It's at Jack Trice. And I just think it's going to be a really, really tight game. I think that the special teams for Iowa State have taken a jump. Iowa's known for some of the best in the country. There's a reason that it's, favored so closely. Really, the only spot I'm a little bit curious is some of the youth on both sides, but specifically for Iowa State. I think that could be tough. I could absolutely see Iowa getting up early, even taking a lead into the fourth quarter. But I just think there are some aspects to this staff, special teams like we talked about, a little bit of an improved offensive line, and frankly, some explosiveness that wasn't necessarily shown as much, Jake, or opened up in week 1, potentially to keep things a little more, secretive. We talked about gamesmanship. I think what I laid out gives a lot of credit to both teams, and I don't think a 1 or 2 point win is really definitive either way. I think Iowa State goes down late. I think they're down late in the game. And the new kid, Chase Contreras, game-winning field goal, 17-16 at Jack Trice and Ames, back-to-back for the Cyclones and head coach Matt Campbell.
Could you imagine?
I'm serious too, because he just showed
he did. Yeah, you're right.
Was it a game winner? Of course not. I'm not saying he kicks a 60-yarder, but I think he's got the leg, the confidence, the poise, and unless we're talking about, I don't even know, some of these offenses really all over the country, I trust this Iowa State defense to keep them in just about any game, specifically here at home. I think if they get behind a bunch early, that could be tough to come back from, especially with a young offense. But I see this game, a lot of it being played within 3 to 6 points. I'm going to go as far as to say I think this game maybe snaps the craziness streak. I don't think there are going to be a lot of those types of plays. That's simply a guess. You can't really predict that type of thing. But, the faster clock, I think these teams play conservatively. Could be one of those games that the last team that just simply gets a chance to score maybe does it. But I like Iowa State in a very, very close, hard-fought defensive battle, Jake.
Well, there you have it. You were right last week. I was wrong. Or I was half wrong. I thought Iowa State would win, but really going on a limb there saying Iowa State's going to beat an FCS team. But you were right in the fashion that it was done. Where I was wrong, and maybe a lot of people were surprised, was how bad of a weekend the Big 12 had. 10-4, still getting used to having 14 teams play. But the losses were from TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, all favorites. West Virginia was an underdog that lost. I'll give credit to Houston. They were the one underdog that won. But other than that, it was an ugly weekend, especially for those other Texas schools.
It really was, Jake. I'm not sure. I just want to mention real quick as we're coming off the Iowa State stuff. Brock Purdy named as a captain for the 49ers.
Good for him.
Pretty cool news that was just shared a few minutes ago. So just wanted to add that as we come off some Cyclones talk. But no, definitely, Jake, credit to Houston, like you mentioned. West Virginia, not a major surprise. I know we don't want to do too much reflection, but I'll just say this about the TCU game. I'm almost surprised about kind of some of the negativity that is coming towards them, because I said it on this show last week. Remember, I said that I was going to take Colorado on that game.
Yep.
We disagreed on that. And I think people have just been a little bit, not being, dramatic or anything, but like disrespectful, not only, of the potential of Coach Deion Sanders and his staff, but they have some very, very legitimate players. So people are saying, it said a lot about TCU. I think it says as much about Colorado, and I think that's an exciting thing for the Big 12 long term, which is why I brought that up. I think it's too early to say it's a down year, but I will say a couple of those, specifically the Baylor game, very surprising to me, Jake.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm never doubting Coach Prime again. I made my mistake. I took some of my medicine. I'll be good. Sorry, Coach Prime. I don't want to become bulletin board material. They're good. Travis Hunter is the man. And I think for TCU, you of course expected the offense to take a step back. But I guess from what I read, I thought the defense might take a bit of a step up to level that out, and it doesn't look like they have so far. But you can only take so much from week one, especially the wins. I think you can take a lot from week one losses, especially with Baylor. And Baylor is a team that I picked to go to the Big 12 championship game. And they looked smaller than Texas State up front, offense and defensive line. And Blake Shapen, I don't know if you saw this stat. I think it was his QBR. He played a better game than CJ Stroud ever did at Ohio State, and they still lost to Texas State at home by 11. That shows just how bad the Baylor defense appears to be and how he just was running around for his life back there. Now he's hurt and he might miss 3-4 games. So I was really high on Baylor. I feel like a sucker now. And I see a lot of the Baylor people that I follow on Twitter wondering if this is it for Aranda, just as a nice guy that had one really good season. I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet.
Yeah, I don't think I am, but I also saw a couple of those tweets. That's certainly a game that you can't really lose. It kind of takes a lot of the excitement and some of the juice out of the, beginning of the season and looking ahead. But looking ahead a little bit closer to this week, do you have a few more picks?
I do. So I went 3-6. Oh, actually, before picks, I want to talk about West Virginia, and not that they lost, but what happened after. So Neil Brown or Penn State had just an awesome backdoor cover. If you bet Penn State, I didn't touch the game.
I did not, but it was a tough cover.
But it was it's what everyone who bets your team wants. And Penn State kept their offense going on the last possession, drove down, scored with like under 20 seconds to go, which, say what you want, Neil Brown, West Virginia head coach, was not thrilled with that one bit. Said in the press conference that Penn State was running up the score, and here's how Penn State head coach James Franklin responded. I'll read a little bit of this quote. It's pretty long. I guess everybody looks at it differently, right? I believe that my responsibility in those types of situations is to get my twos in the game. But I think once those twos get in the game, then they deserve the right and the chance to play and compete. That's what I believe. I believe that from the opening kick to the last whistle, you compete and you play. Now, if you leave your ones in, that's a different story. Then you should change how you play and take those knees and you run in the situations. So I'm on Team Franklin here. I think the winning team has the right to do whatever they want, especially if it's the backups in and you just got run off the field. That's the end of the story, in my opinion, and it's a bad look for Brown.
I think I lean that way as well, Jake. I don't feel super strongly about this either way, but I think that logic and the way Coach Franklin really explained it makes a ton of sense to me. I think it's a great opportunity for some of the players that don't always get those chances, certainly. And, it's not like there's a rule that says when they're trying to score that you're not able to stop them.
Exactly.
So I do think, that I would lean that way as well with Coach Franklin and Penn State. And their starting offense looked pretty good as well.
Neil, put yourself in the position of a 18-year-old running back that's playing in his first ever whiteout game. What 18-year-old kid's not going to want to score in that position? That's my thoughts on that. We'll get into our picks courtesy of Circa Sports Iowa, the exclusive sports betting app of Iowa Everywhere. You can get the highest limits, lowest holds, and the best odds all on Circa Sports Iowa. That's how I did my plays this last weekend. Didn't do great in the Big 12 on Saturday. My Thursday, Friday, Sunday were all good days, but I struggled on Saturday, the main course. I mentioned I went 3-6, and this week we're going to get back on track with 3 picks each. And I'm going to go with Utah at Baylor. We just talked about them. The Utes are favored by 7.5. I was on the Utes in either week 0 or whenever they played Florida. I took them and they covered for me. They're going into a Baylor team that just had their heart ripped out and may not be able to recover from that, losing your quarterback. I trust Messingham on the road at Baylor. SMU at Oklahoma. This is from the sheer fact that I was so off on Oklahoma last week. And say what you want about the Sooners, they really, really take care of business against those group of 5 teams. I don't think SMU will have enough horsepower or pony power to go into Norman. Give me the Sooners by 15.5. And then finally, Texas on the road at Alabama. I've been saying this all month long on the podcast. I trust Texas in this game more than I trust the Longhorns against Houston or Iowa State. They would have beat Alabama last year, in my opinion, if Quinn Ewers didn't get hurt. I think Texas is going to go into Tuscaloosa, give Bama a game. I'm not going to lay the money line, although it's tempting. I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to take the touchdown and take Texas +7. Follow along with me throughout the weekend on Jake Brend TV, and we'll see how I do. We'll track this throughout the year. Nick, how about you?
I'm excited for that game. We'll just kind of naturally slide into this one. I think Alabama wins. I think very highly of that team. I think they could potentially get to the title game down the line. But I think you're right. Texas just seems to get up for these types of games. They probably would have won that last season. I remember that was the week of one of my first games covering the Cyclones. Definitely, it might have even been CyHawk. But I'm going to ride with the Longhorns there. I do think Bama wins, but Texas, I could see them making a 3 or 4 point game. We'll go Kansas. -3, Illinois, Kansas at home. Friday night game. Believe Jalen Daniels expected to play. Things have at least been trending in that direction. And though I didn't get to see as much of it as I would have liked, was not super impressed by Illinois week 1. They lost several really, really good players to the NFL draft. Then this, I just think, is going to be a fun, entertaining game. Oregon, Texas Tech, bounce back spot for the Red Raiders a little bit. I got them covering that 6.5, 7 points. I think there's a lot of talent offensively there. I think that's going to be a really, really fun atmosphere, and we will see kind of the battle of two very encouraging offenses in that game with a Big 12 team and I guess a future Big 10 team there as well, my friend.
So you're taking Oregon's mascot to not have to do 546 push-ups. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
If he goes into Lubbock and has to do that many push-ups, that's a really, really bad sign for the Red Raiders. I don't mind that plus 6.5 pick. I think that line dipped down a little bit as an overreaction to a really that's a tough place to play, to go to Wyoming. First game of the year. Laramie was rocking, but yeah, I don't mind that pick there. It's going to be a really good Big 12 slate, all things considered.
I think
between
nationally even. But yeah.
One game that I didn't touch that I'm going to be really, really tuned in on is that Central Florida Boise State game. That's a tough place to play. And Central Florida looked really, really good in their first game.
They did.
What time do they play? Let me pull that up, I should have had that ready. Hopefully it's not an 11 a.m. kick. It's a night game, 6 p.m. FS1.
And there are some fun night games, seriously. Texas, Bama as well. Wisconsin's traveling out to Washington State after their quarterback looked really good. Fun weekend of college football here.
Oklahoma State goes on the road to Arizona State for some Big 12 after dark. That game I'm not touching. I have no read on that. Oklahoma State's favored by 3.5 points. They didn't look very good at all week 1, but I know Arizona State's one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country. But even if we're not wagering, it's going to be a fun game to tune into. But for now, Nick, do you have anything else? Any CyHawk talk? Aiden, did you disagree with anything that we had to say about the game? From the Channel Seed Studios, I think we're gonna end this show, and you'll hear from us this time next week, live at 2:30 for the last time in the in-person Channel Seed Studios. But Nick, I'll see you on Saturday bright and early in Ames. Be sure if you're listening now, tune into CyHawk Game Day on Local 5 ABC at 10:30. Me and Raina Garcia will break down everything you need to know about the game. I can't wait. It's going to be a fun
I'm looking
day.
forward to Saturday. I think emotionally it's going to take a toll on me. Obviously, my last game here in person. But, I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a good football game, highly competitive defensive battle, like I mentioned. And if any of our great listeners or viewers, run into me on the way in, please say hello. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.
We'll see you then.